I knew something was wrong the moment the catch began whispering in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. People think fishing near the Mariana Trench is just dangerous because of the depth, but they don't know about the 11 rules we follow just to stay alive out here. I remember the first time I broke one of those rules, how the water around the boat seemed to breathe as if something beneath us had been waiting for that mistake. I wasn't supposed to hear my own voice rise from the net that night, and yet I did. What scared me most wasn't the words. It was the way they knew my name. I kept staring at the net as the whisper that sounded like me faded into the dark water, and for a moment I thought I was losing my mind. The captain always warned us about Rule 1. Always return anything that speaks in your voice. But hearing that soft imitation of my own breath made the rule feel like something carved into my bones rather than written on an old clipboard. Elias, who had been fishing these waters longer than I'd been alive, leaned close and muttered that I should cut the line before whatever was down there decided to climb all the way up. I tried to laugh it off, but the tremor in my hands made it clear I didn't believe a single word passing through my lips. The air around the boat felt heavier than usual, as if the ocean itself had drifted upward and settled over us. The lantern at the stern flickered in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like the breath of something resting just out of sight. Elias stood silently for a while, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the net, still sinking into the trench, as if dragged by a weight we could not see. I didn't want to admit it to him, but a part of me thought the whisper hadn't actually stopped. It felt like it had simply changed position, moving from below me to somewhere inside the back of my head. The longer I waited for him to speak, the more I feared he was hearing it too. When Elias finally stepped away, he told me to keep the boat steady while he checked the starboard lines, but his voice lacked its usual roughness. It sounded lighter, almost too calm, and I wondered whether he was trying to convince me or himself that the night was still normal. The ocean isn't gentle out here. Even on calm nights, everything feels slightly delayed, slightly wrong, as if the water is thinking before it moves. The sound of Elias's boots shifting on the deck reminded me of someone pacing out of nervous habit rather than purpose. I could tell he wanted me to talk, to break the tension, but my throat felt tight, as if the whisper had wrapped itself around my vocal cords and waited for the perfect moment to speak through me. By the time he returned, he was gripping a lantern so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. He asked me whether I had heard anything besides my own voice, which told me he had heard something as well, but wasn't ready to admit it. I told him the ocean had sounded quiet, even though the silence itself felt unnatural, like it had been placed over the water deliberately. He nodded once, not looking at me, and I saw the way his jaw clenched before he muttered that the night wasn't following its usual rhythm. He didn't elaborate, and the way he angled his shoulders away from the net told me he didn't want me asking questions either. The clouds above us were low enough that they looked like they were brushing the top of the mast, spreading a faint blue glow over the deck. It made the shadows look longer, stretched thin across the wooden planks as though pulled by invisible hands. The ocean beneath us was too still, almost reflective, showing a blurry version of the boat that seemed to breathe when the water shifted. Elias told me not to look down too long, that the reflection could change if I stared at it, but he said it in the tone people use when pretending something is folklore, even though they're terrified it might be true. I did as he said, but the brief glimpse I caught showed a shape beside my reflection that did not belong to any of us. When the first tug came through the net line, I thought it was my imagination, just a tremor caused by the current. Then the second tug pulled hard enough to tilt the stern a few inches toward the trench, jolting both of us upright. Elias ran to the wheel, cursing under his breath, though he never once looked down at the water. His hands shook as he threw the engine into reverse, and even though the propeller churned loudly beneath us, the boat barely shifted an inch. Something below wasn't letting go. Another pull dragged the line taut enough that droplets sprayed across my face, and for a moment the entire deck vibrated like a living thing exhaling beneath our feet. Elias shouted for me to cut the net, but I hesitated because the line wasn't just pulling, it was pulsing like a vein carrying something alive. Every instinct in my body told me that whatever was pulling us downward wasn't interested in food or territory, it was interested in me. The thought made my stomach clench as I grabbed the cutter and stepped closer to the edge, praying I wouldn't see anything staring back. The moment my boot reached the side of the deck, a faint ripple spread across the surface, and the whisper returned, softer than before but unmistakably shaped like my voice forming a word I never wanted to hear drift upward through cold water. It said my name. I froze, blade pressed against rope, and Elias yelled at me again, but his voice sounded distant, as if muffled by deep water. My lungs tightened, and the coldness creeping up my spine made it feel as though I were sinking, even though my feet were firmly planted on the planks. The whisper rose again, longer this time, more confident, repeating my name as if trying to lure me closer to the edge. I took one step back, afraid that if I leaned any farther, I'd feel a hand break the surface and reach for my ankle. The rope pulsed again, stronger, and for a moment it felt like something below was laughing through the tension of the line. Elias rushed toward me, grabbing my arm and pulling me back from the rail so abruptly I nearly dropped the cutter. His face had drained of all color, and he asked whether I was trying to listen on purpose, as if the whisper had a pull I wasn't resisting. I told him I wasn't, but the way his eyes narrowed suggested he wasn't sure whether he could trust me anymore. He pulled me backward until my spine met the mast, telling me to stay there while he cut the rope himself, but I grabbed his wrist and told him he wasn't going near that edge. Something in the water wanted one of us closer, and I didn't care if he thought I was panicking. I wasn't letting it choose. The pulse through the rope grew faster, almost eager, as Elias and I argued in low, tense voices about who should cut it. Neither of us moved closer, each waiting for the other to back down, or for the creature below to reveal more of itself. The whisper rose again, but this time it wasn't shaped like my voice alone. It carried Elias's tone too, blending our words as if stitching them together into something new. Hearing that imitation stole the argument right out of our mouths, Elias's hand shook violently as he reached for the lantern, lifting it high as though the weak flame could protect us from whatever had learned to speak in our voices. Another pull rocked the boat so hard I stumbled against the mast, gripping it like it was the only stable thing left in the world. Elias turned to me, eyes wide, and shouted that we needed to cut it now before the creature decided to come up instead of dragging us down. I didn't hesitate this time. I lunged forward, cutter in hand, and sliced the rope with a single motion, sending the tension snapping loose. The boat lurched backward, freed so suddenly that both of us collapsed to our knees. The whisper cut off immediately, swallowed by the trench like it had never existed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt painfully still, as though the ocean were holding its breath, waiting to see whether we had learned anything at all. Elias stood first, pulling himself upright with a grim expression that told me he had seen something in the water that he wouldn't speak of yet. I steadied myself against the mast, still hearing the echo of my own voice rising from the deep, wondering whether we had cut the line too late. The ocean around us returned to its unnatural calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature had simply gone quiet because it knew our names now. When we both finally turned toward the edge, we saw only dark water staring back, unbroken and smooth, as if hiding whatever had been reaching for us moments ago. I told Elias we needed to leave, but he only nodded slowly, eyes scanning the emptiness where the rope had sunk into the trench. The boat drifted in an uneasy silence, and the stillness around us felt heavier than before, pressing against my lungs as if warning me that the night wasn't finished with us yet. And somewhere beneath the surface, deeper than I could imagine, I felt a presence sinking slowly away, but not leaving completely. It knew my voice now, and I knew it wasn't the last time I'd hear it. As the last remnants of daylight faded across the Mariana Trench, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on my shoulders, but I knew I couldn't afford to rest. The whispers from the ketch still lingered in my mind, repeating faintly, even as I focused on securing the nets for the next haul. That's when I remembered Rule 2. Never leave the net unattended after the first check, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. The ocean around the boat seemed alive, as if currents and shadows moved intentionally, testing whether I would respect the rules or falter. I glanced toward my partner, who seemed less convinced than ever, muttering, "It's just deep-sea fish, relax." And yet his unease mirrored mine perfectly. I adjusted the pulley system, making sure the net hung securely over the side, eyes never leaving its writhing contents. Every time I looked away, the faint voice mimicking mine seemed to grow bolder, echoing in cadence with the waves. My hands were sore, and my mind begged for a brief distraction. But Rule 2 burned in my memory like a branding iron. "Do not leave it," I whispered to myself, repeating the words like a lifeline. The darkness below the boat deepened unnaturally, swallowing the water in black that seemed almost solid, and I realized that even the tiniest lapse could be enough to invite something from the trench that should never be disturbed. Minutes dragged as I monitored the net, my body tense and rigid. The creature shifted constantly, seemingly aware of every twitch of my fingers, every hesitant glance I threw toward the edge of the deck. My partner leaned closer, trying to distract me, asking, "What's the worst that could happen if we just let it rest for a bit?" I shot him a glare, voice tight with urgency. "You can't. You have to follow the rule." That instant, a ripple ran across the water so fast and unnatural it made my stomach knot. And I knew Rule 2 wasn't just a suggestion, it was survival. Every shadow, every whisper, every twitch in the net felt like a countdown to something terrible. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell as the night swallowed the horizon, and the stars became blurred reflections on the black water. I adjusted the net again, sweat running down my temples, despite the chill, my hands raw from the repeated checks. The creature's voice grew clearer, articulating words in a tone I knew all too well. "I'm here," it said, almost laughing, almost mocking, in the exact inflection of my own voice. The weight of Rule 2, never leave the net unattended after the first check, pressed on me like a living thing, reminding me that even a moment of negligence could turn this night into a nightmare I wouldn't survive. At one point, my partner, still skeptical, reached for the net to adjust it himself. "Relax, I'll just make a small tweak," he said. My heart jumped, and I grabbed his wrist firmly, shaking my head. "You don't understand. We can't. It's Rule 2. If we leave it even for a second, we don't know what it'll do." The water around the hull shifted violently, sending a spray over the deck, and the whispers became frantic, echoing our names in overlapping tones. I felt panic rise inside me, a burning heat of fear, but I forced myself to focus, to follow the rule, to observe every movement, every murmur, every heartbeat. The wind grew stronger, pushing against the boat as though trying to tip it, and the darkness of the trench seemed to seep upward, curling around the sides like black smoke. I could see the faint shimmer of the creature's scales, almost glowing in the dim deck lights, and it pulsed rhythmically, as if aware I was watching. I reminded myself yet again of Rule 2, mentally drilling the importance into every fiber of my being. My partner muttered something under his breath about superstition, but the voice from the net suddenly responded to him, a chilling echo of his own tone, repeating words he had never spoken aloud. The tension gripped us both like a vice, and I realized even questioning the rules could trigger consequences far worse than we imagined. Night deepened, bringing a silence heavier than any sound, broken only by the gentle sway of the ocean and the occasional shift of the net. I crouched by it, hands hovering above the ropes, eyes darting between the shadows below and the strange, almost sentient movements above. Each flick of the creature's fins seemed intentional, almost communicative, and I could swear I caught glimpses of shapes in the water that were not fish, but something older, darker. My mind kept returning to Rule 2, and I whispered it under my breath like a prayer, knowing that failing it could mean losing more than just the night. It could mean losing ourselves to whatever lurked in the depths. By the early hours, the tension reached a peak. Every time I blinked, it felt as though the creature in the net had shifted slightly, following my gaze, anticipating my next movement. My partner, exhausted and pale, finally sank onto a crate, mumbling, "I can't keep watching this all night." I clenched my jaw, shaking my head, and said quietly, "Then you're not ready to be here. If we leave the net even for a moment, everything changes." The water seemed to respond to my words, swirling unnaturally, and the whispers formed longer, more coherent phrases, repeating not just names but memories, fears, secrets, things no one else should have known. I shivered as the first hint of daylight approached, knowing that Rule 2 had been tested tonight in ways I couldn't yet understand. The sun's pale light barely pierced the dense fog hovering over the trench, but even as the deck began to brighten, I refused to let the net out of my sight. I kept every line tight, every knot secure, every movement deliberate. The creature pulsed beneath the surface, an almost hypnotic rhythm that threatened to draw me in. I felt my partner inching closer, curiosity overriding his fear, but I held him back. "Don't even think about it," I warned, voice low or we'll regret it. "Rule 2 exists for a reason." His eyes widened as the net trembled again, and I realized that nothing, not time, not exhaustion, not skepticism, could protect us if we failed this rule even once. And then a sudden silence fell. The water around the net stilled unnaturally, shadows fading, whispers cutting abruptly. My heart raced, and I froze, knowing that the pause itself was a warning, a test, a heartbeat before something inevitable. I tightened my grip and whispered the rule once more, a mental mantra, knowing that the moment I looked away, the unseen forces below would act. Something had been watching us all night, assessing how well I had respected Rule 2. Never leave the net unattended after the first check, and now it waited to see whether we would pass or falter. The tension was unbearable, thick in the air like an unspoken threat, as the boat swayed gently, and the net moved with subtle, purposeful motions. I took a deep breath, muscles taut, senses on high alert, realizing that obeying Rule 2 was not just a precaution, it was the difference between life and becoming just another echo in the Mariana Trench. Somewhere below something waited, silent and patient, and I knew that even with the second check complete, the night was far from over, and the ocean still held secrets that would not stay buried. The morning light barely touched the horizon, casting a pale glow over the Mariana Trench, but the deck felt heavier than ever. The net trembled subtly, and I could feel the presence inside, as if it were aware of every heartbeat, every shiver of fear. I kept reminding myself silently, Rule 3, never speak to the creatures in the net, no matter how they call your name, and tried to steady my hands while tightening the ropes. My partner leaned closer, curiosity obvious in his eyes, whispering, "Are you sure it's just a fish?" I didn't answer, focusing on the shadowed movements beneath the net, knowing even a single word could invite disaster. Hours passed slowly, every second amplified by the faint echo of whispers that seemed almost intelligible. I could feel the creature studying me, calculating, as if testing my willpower and patience. My hands moved carefully over the ropes, adjusting knots and checking the tension, never daring to speak aloud. Every so often, I thought I heard my own name carried on the wind, a faint sound that made my pulse spike. I reminded myself of the rule again, holding the words like a shield in my mind, refusing to respond to the tantalizing calls. The sea around the boat grew restless, as if reacting to my restraint. Ripples formed without wind, dark shapes moving just beneath the surface, matching the rhythm of the net's subtle pulsations. My partner shifted nervously, eyes darting from the shadows to my tense posture. "It's like it's trying to talk to us," he muttered. I shook my head firmly, thinking only of Rule 3, the ironclad instruction that had kept others from losing themselves to the depths. Speaking, even in curiosity or fear, could be a fatal mistake. As the hours dragged on, the whispers grew more persistent, repeating fragments of conversations I hadn't spoken aloud, teasing my memory and tugging at my attention. The temptation to respond, to say something, anything, was maddening. I gritted my teeth and focused solely on securing the deck and nets, repeating the rule internally, like a mantra. My hands were stiff and raw from constant adjustment, and yet every motion had to be deliberate. The creature inside the net seemed almost to pulse in awareness, its eyes glimmering with a cognizance that made my skin crawl. By midday, the creature's voice had grown clearer, echoing syllables from my own speech patterns in near-perfect mimicry. I could feel my partner trembling beside me, and the weight of our isolation pressed down more heavily than the Mariana Trench itself. Each ripple in the water seemed intentional, almost a communication directed at me. I silently reinforced the rule one last time in my mind, refusing to acknowledge the calls. Even a whisper, even a question back, could let the abyss reach in and claim something I might never get back. The day wore on slowly, the boat swaying gently, shadows stretching across the deck in impossible shapes. I noticed the creature moving with intention now, circling the net in a way that felt deliberate and probing. My partner's curiosity became almost unbearable, and he reached for the net once, hesitating. I grabbed his arm, eyes wide, whispering, "Don't. It's Rule 3. You can't speak to it." The creature pulsed beneath the surface, almost as if responding to the warning, and the whispers quieted slightly, leaving an oppressive silence that made the air feel thick and metallic. Even as the afternoon waned, and the sun dipped lower, the creature remained impossibly alert, every twitch in the net measured and purposeful. I moved carefully, adjusting ropes and lines, careful not to provoke it by accident. My partner kept glancing at me, the tension evident in his every movement, but I said nothing. I couldn't risk a single word, a single acknowledgement of the calls that now seemed almost human in their tone. Obedience to Rule 3 had become not just a precaution, it was the only thing keeping us tethered to sanity. Shadows deepened on the water as night approached, the light dimming in a way that made the trench look infinite, black and hungry. The creature pulsed and shifted inside the net, responding to our silence with a patience that was unsettling. My partner's breathing grew shallow, and I could feel my own pulse thudding like a drum in my ears. Each movement had to be meticulous, every knot retightened, every rope checked. I repeated the rule one last time in my mind, willing myself to resist even the faintest temptation to speak, even as the whispers grew so convincing they sounded almost human. As darkness fully claimed the horizon, the deck felt smaller, the shadows pressing in, as if to remind me of the stakes. I crouched by the net, holding ropes tightly, refusing to give in to the almost seductive lure of responding. The whispers had grown from syllables to almost coherent phrases, repeating my fears, my regrets, and my secrets. My partner kept glancing at me, desperate for reassurance, and I could only shake my head, refusing to speak a word. The lesson was clear, obeying Rule 3, never speak to the creatures in the net, no matter how they call your name, was more than survival. It was the difference between life and being consumed by the trench. As the first chill of night settled across the water, I knew the real test was just beginning. The creature's attention never wavered, the shadows beneath it shifting in rhythm with the net, and I realized that obeying this single rule might not be enough. The abyss had a patience older than anything I had ever known, and even the faintest sound could draw it closer. I tightened my grip and forced my partner to sit, murmuring silently to myself the rule one last time, knowing that the ocean was watching, waiting, and judging. The darkness of the Mariana Trench pressed down like a living weight as the evening shadows stretched across the deck, and I felt every shiver in my bones amplified by the silence. The net pulsed faintly beneath the surface, and the creature inside seemed to sense every movement, every breath I took. That's when I remembered Rule 4, never leave the deck alone when the net is on the line. The words a cold anchor in my mind as I refused even the slightest step toward the cabin. My partner fidgeted beside me, unease written across his face, but he didn't dare challenge the rule directly, perhaps finally understanding the stakes of our isolation. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the ropes and making the net sway with a deliberate rhythm that seemed almost mocking. I adjusted the lines carefully, every motion precise, knowing that even a second of absence could be catastrophic. The whispers from the net were softer now, almost coaxing, as though the creature was testing our resolve, trying to see if we'd break Rule 4. My hands were stiff, muscles screaming from hours of maintaining tension, but I refused to look away or let fatigue dictate my actions. Every shadow that flickered across the deck felt alive, a reminder that even brief abandonment could invite disaster. Hours crawled by in a tense silence, punctuated only by subtle movements of the water and the soft, eerie undulations of the net. I crouched beside it, adjusting knots and rechecking every line, aware that leaving the deck for even a moment could have consequences I wasn't ready to face. My partner kept glancing nervously toward the cabin, tempted to step inside for a quick moment, and I gripped his arm, whispering, "Not now, Rule 4. His eyes widened in recognition, and he froze, understanding for the first time that the rules weren't superstitions, they were lifelines. The net trembled, as if it were aware of our hesitation. The whispers grew bolder, more insistent, almost forming words I could understand, but dared not respond to. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, to grab a cup of water, to seek brief distraction, but I refused. Rule 4 demanded presence, vigilance, and obedience, and the creature inside the net seemed to measure every second of neglect with cruel precision. My partner and I huddled near the ropes, the dim deck light casting long, unnatural shadows, and I could feel a cold tension gripping the wood beneath our feet, almost as if the ocean itself were pressing against our isolation. By midnight, the weight of the Mariana Trench seemed almost tangible, pressing down from below, the black water absorbing any sound that didn't belong. The net shivered violently, pulsing in a rhythm that echoed my heartbeat, and I realized the creature was aware of our fatigue, testing us, seeing if we would fail Rule 4. My partner whispered something nervously. "I don't know if I can stay up all night," but I shook my head firmly. "You have to," I said quietly. "The rule is clear. If we leave, we don't know what happens next." The words barely left my lips when the net trembled again, a silent warning that obedience was everything. Minutes dragged into hours, every small sound from the ocean amplified, every shadow a possible threat. I kept the lines taut, hands aching, eyes straining to see beneath the faint shimmer of the net. The creature pulsed almost hypnotically, moving with deliberate, intelligent grace, reminding me silently why leaving the deck alone was forbidden. My partner shifted nervously beside me, his curiosity and skepticism battling exhaustion, but I held firm. Obedience to Rule 4 wasn't just about safety. It was about maintaining the thin barrier between ourselves and something older, something patient, lurking below. The wind picked up, tossing the boat gently, but with intent, and the ocean's surface reflected long black shapes that didn't belong to anything I recognized. Every muscle in my body tensed, every nerve alert, as I checked every knot and rope. The net's subtle pulsations now seemed synchronized with my heartbeat, a reminder that the creature knew exactly how tired we were. Even a second of absence could be fatal, I realized, and the whispers, soft, undulating, almost mocking, reminded me of the consequences we had narrowly avoided in previous hauls. I repeated Rule 4 silently in my mind, a mantra to maintain control and resist distraction. The night deepened further, darkness swallowing the edges of the deck, and the air grew colder, thicker, heavier. I crouched low, every sense strained to detect movement, as the net trembled faintly, almost impatiently, beneath the ropes. My partner's gaze flicked nervously toward the cabin again, the temptation almost unbearable, but he didn't move. I could feel the intelligence of the creature pressing against our patience, as if measuring whether we would succumb to fatigue or obey the rule. The stakes were clear. Leaving the deck alone, even for a moment, could allow the trench to claim something we weren't ready to lose. Hours passed, punctuated only by the low swish of the water and the faint, eerie pulses of the net. The whispers became almost hypnotic, attempting to lure us into speaking, into leaving, into failure. I gritted my teeth, repeating Rule 4 one last time in my mind, reinforcing the importance of constant vigilance. My partner's breath was shallow beside me, his eyes wide with fear, but the rule held us both in place. The ocean below was silent now, yet I could feel it moving with intention, testing us, waiting for a single lapse to strike. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the deck felt impossibly small, the shadows and net pulsations, a constant reminder of the trench's patience. Every line was secured, every knot tight, yet the tension lingered, unrelenting. The whispers had faded slightly, almost as if acknowledging our obedience, yet I knew better. The night had tested us, and Rule 4, never leave the deck alone when the net is on the line, had held. But the creature was still there, patient, waiting for the next moment of weakness, and I realized the night was far from over, and the trench had many more lessons to teach. The morning fog hung low over the Mariana Trench, curling across the deck like a slow-moving shroud, and every part of me screamed caution. The net swayed gently above the water, the creature inside pulsating faintly, as if aware of my every thought. That's when I remembered Rule 5. Never touch the water with bare hands once the net is on the line, and a cold tremor ran through me. My partner reached toward the railing absent-mindedly, and I grabbed his arm quickly, whispering, "Not with your hands, not even a fingertip." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear reflect back in them, the weight of the Mariana Trench pressing on both of us. The sun barely penetrated the gray mist, leaving the water an endless inky black. Every movement I made was deliberate, hands gripping the ropes and pulleys, resisting the urge to adjust anything by touch alone. Even a small slip of a finger could invite something ancient, patient, and intelligent lurking beneath the surface. I shivered, knowing the ocean had its own consciousness, testing our discipline with every shift in the current. My partner tried to ask a question about why the rule existed, but I shook my head, refusing to explain. The consequences had to be learned, not lectured. Hours passed slowly as we maintained vigilance. The net pulsed in the water, subtle but deliberate, as though the creature inside were measuring our obedience. Its whispering voice repeated fragments of my thoughts, sometimes perfectly mimicking words I hadn't spoken aloud. I kept my hands gripping the ropes at all times, refusing to break Rule 5, repeating the rules silently in my mind, as if that could anchor us to safety. My partner, exhausted, occasionally glanced toward the water with curiosity, but I caught him every time before he could reach toward the black, undulating surface. The ocean around the boat seemed alive, responding to our restraint. Currents twisted and pulsed against the hull in ways that were unnatural, almost deliberate. I realized that touching the water, even accidentally, could send a signal to the creature below that we were careless. It could provoke it, teach it to breach the rule of distance. My mind raced with the memory of past fishermen, the whispered stories of what happened to those who didn't follow this rule. Even the slightest contact, they said, invited a voice that could mimic yours forever, a shadow of yourself lost to the abyss. By midday, fatigue threatened my focus. My arms ached from gripping ropes and pulleys, and the wind had picked up slightly, tossing the boat in gentle but persistent waves. I could feel the creature inside the net shifting, pulsing with anticipation, as if aware that my muscles were tiring and my attention was slipping. Every instinct told me to look away or adjust with bare hands, but the rule burned in my memory. Rule 5 wasn't just caution, it was protection. One slip, one touch, and the net would claim more than just a name. It could claim my essence. The whispers grew more insistent, calling fragments of my name, mocking my exhaustion. "I know you," they said in a voice identical to mine, twisting syllables into something sinister. My hands tightened around the ropes, knuckles white, muscles trembling, but I refused to break the rule. Even the thought of touching the water sent a cold shiver down my spine. I kept every movement deliberate, leaning over the net only as far as the ropes allowed, observing the creature's responses, counting every pulse, every subtle twitch, as if it were a heartbeat dictating our survival. Hours dragged by, each moment a test of patience. The net pulsed with rhythm, almost like breathing, and I could feel it measuring my restraint, calculating how far I might bend the rule. My partner whispered nervously about superstition, but I ignored him, repeating the rules silently to myself. The water seemed darker now, almost viscous, absorbing sound and light, and every ripple that touched the side of the boat made my heart jump. Rule 5. Never touch the water with bare hands. Once the net is on the line, echoed in my mind, the mantra anchoring me to reality, as the whispers grew louder and more insistent. By evening, exhaustion threatened to break me. The wind tugged at the ropes, the net pulsed more violently, and the whispers now imitated entire phrases I had never spoken aloud. I kept my hands tight on the lines, refusing to reach for any floating debris, ignoring the creeping urge to check the water directly. The ocean seemed to push back, testing my willpower, and my partner leaned heavily against the railing, eyes wide with fear, silent but trembling. I repeated the rule internally, my mind a fortress of discipline, understanding that one touch could erase the boundary between life and the abyss. Night fell fully, darkness swallowing the deck, and the net's pulsations became more pronounced, almost deliberate, almost communicating in a rhythm I couldn't decipher. Shadows moved in the water below, twisting and curling like living smoke, and the creature's whispers sounded almost urgent now, attempting to lure me into error. My partner looked to me for guidance, eyes wide, and I murmured, almost to myself, "Do not touch it," feeling the weight of the Mariana Trench settle across our shoulders. The rule wasn't just a warning, it was the only barrier between sanity and the void. By the early hours, the deck was slick with condensation, and my arms ached from hours of holding tight, but I never wavered. The creature pulsed beneath the net, aware, patient, and relentless. I could feel the tension in the ropes reflecting its awareness, each shiver and twitch a message I couldn't interpret. I repeated the rules silently, one last time, letting it anchor me, letting it protect us both. The whispers had quieted slightly, but their absence felt like a warning. They were waiting for even the smallest mistake. I realized then that Rule 5 had been tested and upheld, but the trench still held countless trials waiting in the darkness. As dawn broke, painting the horizon in pale gray, I finally allowed myself a slow exhale. The creature remained in the net, pulsating faintly, as if acknowledging our obedience. My partner, pale and silent, nodded once, finally understanding the gravity of what we had endured. The ocean's weight lifted slightly, but the lessons of the night remained heavy on my mind. Rule 5. Never touch the water with bare hands. Once the net is on the line had been obeyed, narrowly, but the Mariana Trench still loomed, patient and watchful, promising more trials before the day was done. The pale light of dawn barely cut through the thick mist, hovering over the Mariana Trench, leaving the deck cold and slick beneath my boots. The creature inside the net pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it were testing whether I would honor the rules or bend them under exhaustion. That's when I remembered Rule 6. Always secure the net to at least 2 anchor points before attempting to lift it, the words settling in my mind like a lifeline. My partner's hands hovered over the ropes, uncertain, as I motioned him back. If we skip this, even for a second, I warned quietly, we don't know what the trench will do. The tension between fear and obedience was palpable in the heavy morning air. I moved carefully along the deck, securing the first anchor point to the thick metal hook, making sure the rope was tight and steady. The net trembled faintly, responding almost consciously to every adjustment, and I could feel the creature watching me, aware of my hesitation. The second anchor point was trickier, requiring me to lean over the railing while keeping one eye on the black depths below. My partner whispered nervously, "Is it really necessary?" I didn't answer. The rule was clear, and even a single lapse could turn the net into a conduit for something far older and more intelligent than we had the right to disturb. Hours dragged on as we tested the tension of both anchor points repeatedly. Every slight shift of the net sent subtle ripples through the water, and every pulse from the creature beneath was a reminder that we weren't dealing with ordinary fish. Its whispers, faint but articulate, echoed fragments of my own thoughts in ways that made my stomach churn. I forced myself to ignore the temptation to respond, focusing solely on the rope, the anchors, and the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Rule 6 had to be obeyed, or the consequences would reach deeper than either of us could imagine. The wind picked up, tugging at the net and the boat with small testing motions. I checked the first anchor again, feeling the tension bite against my palms, and then the second, making minute adjustments to ensure balance. The creature's pulses beneath the net seemed almost intelligent, reacting to our compliance or hesitation. My partner's curiosity was becoming unbearable, and I felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. "Do not skip a single step," I murmured, more to myself than him. The rule was simple, yet its enforcement demanded vigilance, patience, and fear combined. By midday, the ocean's surface reflected the gray sky above, but below, the Mariana Trench remained an abyssal black that seemed endless. Shadows moved beneath the net with subtle intention, almost testing the strength of our anchor points. Each pulse of the creature's presence made the ropes vibrate faintly under my hands, reminding me that the rule existed for a reason. I could feel its intelligence pressing against the line, as if it were counting every second we obeyed, every minor twitch or misstep. Rule 6: always secure the net to at least 2 anchor points before attempting to lift it, burned in my mind, a mantra against error. Hours stretched into an oppressive monotony of checking and rechecking. The ropes were taut, the anchors secure, yet every pulse from the net sent a shiver through my body. My partner tried to distract himself, peering into the water as though he might glimpse some ordinary fish, but the shadows below were deliberate, moving with a patience that defied reason. I had to remind myself to breathe slowly, to focus, to keep our hands steady, knowing that one misstep could turn the net into a gateway for something far older and far more intelligent than we were prepared to encounter. The creature's whispers grew sharper, mimicking full sentences I had never spoken aloud, echoing memories and fears I hadn't shared. I crouched low over the ropes, carefully tightening the second anchor once again, refusing to let any fatigue or distraction compromise the rule. My partner shifted nervously beside me, understanding finally that our survival depended entirely on discipline, on adherence to these archaic rules that seemed almost magical in their protective power. Every twitch of the net, every pulse beneath the water was a reminder that the Mariana Trench watched patiently, waiting for error. As the afternoon deepened, I continued to reinforce both anchor points, hands aching but refusing to waver. The creature's intelligence seemed almost sentient, aware of the tension in my muscles, the slight hesitation in my grip. Shadows beneath the net twisted unnaturally, curling like smoke in water, and the whispers pressed in on my mind, testing my obedience. I repeated the rule silently, embedding it deep into my consciousness. Rule 6 must be observed completely, or we risk more than just our safety. It could claim our sanity. By evening, the ocean had grown almost black, the surface reflecting nothing but shadows and the faint glow of our deck lights. I crouched low, adjusting knots on both anchor points, feeling every vibration of the net as if it were alive. My partner remained frozen, hands at his sides, pale and tense, realizing that the rule wasn't optional. Each pulse from the creature beneath was rhythmic, deliberate, almost communicative, reminding me why securing both anchors wasn't merely precaution, it was survival. The whispers rose and fell like wind through hollow bones, teasing, mocking, patient beyond comprehension. Night fell fully, and the Mariana Trench beneath us seemed to draw closer, swallowing the edges of the deck in darkness. The net pulsed with an intelligence I could barely comprehend, every movement measured and deliberate. I checked the tension one last time, ensuring both anchors held firm against the unpredictable sway of the water. Even as exhaustion threatened to dull my senses, I repeated Rule 6 silently, letting the mantra anchor me to discipline and survival. My partner finally exhaled, tension leaving him only slightly, realizing we had obeyed the rule fully. But the creature remained, patient and observant, waiting for the next moment of weakness. By the early hours, a quiet settled over the ocean, but it was deceptive. The creature beneath the net had ceased pulsing so overtly, its intelligence waiting in shadow, observing our compliance. Every second on deck was deliberate, every movement measured, and I could feel the patience of the Mariana Trench pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. The lesson was clear. Rule 6, always secure the net to at least 2 anchor points before attempting to lift it, was not merely a guideline, it was a shield against the abyss, a fragile barrier separating us from the deep's relentless gaze. Night had fallen over the Mariana Trench, like a suffocating blanket, leaving the deck of our boat shrouded in shadows that seemed unnaturally thick. The net pulsed beneath the surface, moving in subtle, deliberate rhythms that defied the natural motion of the waves. That's when I remembered Rule 7. Never look directly into the water when the net moves on its own, the warning flashing in my mind like a siren. My partner's eyes flickered toward the black depths, curiosity battling terror, and I gripped his arm firmly, whispering, "Do not even a glance." The tension between instinct and obedience was unbearable, each heartbeat echoing across the deck, as if the abyss itself were counting. Every subtle sway of the net sent ripples across the water that seemed almost conscious, curling back toward the boat like fingers reaching out for us. I kept my gaze fixed on the ropes and the deck, refusing to let my eyes wander, repeating the rule silently to steady my shaking hands. The creature beneath the net pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat, a constant reminder that Rule 7 was not arbitrary. It was the only thing preventing us from losing ourselves. My partner muttered, almost to himself, "It's just water, right?" And I shook my head firmly, feeling a chill crawl up my spine as shadows twisted beneath the surface. Hours passed in oppressive silence, broken only by the faint creaks of the boat and the subtle shifts of the net. The water below remained black and unyielding, but I could sense movements, subtle and deliberate, that seemed to mirror our tension. The whispers from the creature grew more distinct, forming fragments of words I knew I had never spoken aloud. Each pulse of the net seemed almost hypnotic, attempting to lure my attention downward. I clenched my jaw, repeating the rule internally, knowing that even a single slip of the eyes could invite disaster. The wind tugged at the ropes, making the net sway slightly, and my partner's curiosity nearly got the better of him. He leaned dangerously close to the railing, eyes scanning the inky water, and I grabbed his arm, forcing him back. Rule 7. Do not look. I hissed, my voice trembling, despite my attempts to stay calm. The net shifted violently in response, and the creature's whispering voice echoed faintly in perfect imitation of mine. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mix of fear and relief that we had obeyed the rule. The Mariana Trench seemed to pulse beneath us, patient and unyielding, watching for the smallest lapse. Time became meaningless as the night dragged on, each second stretching endlessly as I monitored the ropes, keeping hands taut and eyes fixed away from the water. The shadows beneath the net moved in impossible ways, curling and twisting as though aware of my discipline. My partner grew pale and silent, finally realizing that obedience was not negotiable. The whispers persisted, repeating fragments of our memories, taunting, coaxing, testing our focus. I reminded myself once again of Rule 7, the mantra serving as a lifeline against the seductive pull of the abyss below. By the early hours of the morning, the creature's voice had grown bolder, mimicking not only my words but my thoughts, twisting them into sinister, almost mocking phrases. Each ripple of the net carried intention, every subtle shift a message we were not meant to interpret. My muscles ached from holding tension, my senses were on edge, but I could not allow myself to look. The rule wasn't a suggestion, it was protection. One glance, one moment of curiosity, and the abyss could claim something irretrievably human. The wind intensified slightly, and the boat swayed, causing the net to swing with unpredictable motion. I crouched low, holding the ropes tightly, careful not to let fatigue or fear weaken my discipline. The creature pulsed beneath the surface, almost impatiently, and I could feel its intelligence pressing against our resolve, probing for weakness. My partner's eyes wandered once, but I caught the movement instantly, tugging him back, reminding him silently of the consequences. The Mariana Trench seemed alive, its patience vast, its focus unyielding, waiting for the moment we faltered. Night stretched on, shadows deepening across the deck, twisting in ways that made it impossible to distinguish the real from the imagined. The net pulsed continuously, a hypnotic rhythm that threatened to pull my attention toward the water. The whispers grew more articulate, forming almost complete sentences that echoed fears I had buried long ago. I clenched the ropes harder, grounding myself with the repetition of Rule 7. Never look directly into the water when the net moves on its own, understanding that compliance was the only thing separating us from calamity. As the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the water in dull gray, the tension remained thick and suffocating. Every twitch of the net, every pulse beneath the surface, was a reminder of the trench's intelligence and patience. My partner's hands were white from gripping the ropes, eyes wide with a fear I recognized in myself. The whispers had quieted slightly, as if acknowledging our obedience, but the lesson remained clear. One glance, one moment of curiosity, could undo everything. The abyss waited silently, knowing our discipline had held for now, but ever patient for the next test. By the time the sun began to rise, casting feeble light across the deck, I realized we had survived the night, because we had obeyed the rule completely. The net remained tethered, the creature pulsing faintly below, and the Mariana Trench stretched infinitely, dark and patient, waiting. I knew in my heart that Rule 7 had been tested and passed, but the trench had many more trials, each one darker, more cunning, and more patient than the last. Even as I exhaled, relief mingled with fear, knowing that the abyss was still watching, waiting, and planning for the next moment of weakness. The morning fog hung thick over the Mariana Trench, curling like smoke above the boat, and the deck felt heavier than ever under the weight of the night's tension. The net beneath the surface pulsed subtly, each movement deliberate and almost intelligent, as though it could sense our fear. I remembered Rule 8, never respond to the echoes that sound like your own voice, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. My partner, exhausted and pale, murmured, "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer, knowing the risk of engaging was far greater than curiosity. Even a single syllable could give the trench a foothold in our minds. The echoes grew stronger as the hours passed, twisting my own words into distorted forms that seemed to call me by name. The creature beneath the net pulsed rhythmically in response, each vibration syncing unnervingly with my heartbeat. My partner's eyes darted nervously toward the water, tempted to answer, and I grabbed his arm firmly. "Do not," I whispered harshly. "That's Rule 8, you cannot respond." Every instinct screamed to listen, to engage, but I forced myself to focus on the ropes, on the anchors, on the deck beneath my hands, refusing to give in. The ocean's surface rippled unnaturally, reflecting shadows that had no source, and the whispers, my echoes, continued to grow more insistent. They repeated conversations I hadn't had aloud, fragments of my own thoughts, mocking, coaxing, testing my resolve. I clenched my fists, my muscles trembling, but I refused to answer, keeping my mind tethered to Rule 8. My partner, silent but visibly shaking, finally seemed to understand the danger. The abyss wasn't just below us, it was inside our heads, patient, intelligent, and infinitely cunning. Hours crawled by as I maintained vigilance, gripping the ropes and adjusting the net carefully. Every pulse from beneath the water seemed to carry intention, a deliberate signal measuring our obedience. My partner occasionally glanced toward the shadows, whispering fragmented thoughts, but I shook my head, keeping him grounded. The echoes of our own voices were deceptive, almost indistinguishable from reality, and the rule was our only defense. Rule 8 had to be followed perfectly. One misstep could unravel the barrier between us and the creature below. The midday sun did little to pierce the gray fog, and the Mariana Trench below remained an endless black void. Shadows shifted unnaturally beneath the net, twisting in impossible ways that made my stomach churn. The whispers became more articulate, repeating fears I had buried long ago, coaxing me to speak, to engage, to break the rule. I gritted my teeth and repeated Rule 8 silently, letting the mantra anchor me as my hands tightened on the ropes. Each pulse beneath the surface reminded me of the trench's patience, of its intelligence, of its intent. By late afternoon, the tension was suffocating, almost physical, pressing down on my shoulders as I crouched low beside the net. The echoes now mimicked my partner's voice as well, twisting his words, turning them into something alien and threatening. He shivered beside me, frozen, and I whispered, "Do not respond. It's Rule 8. The creature's pulses beneath the water grew sharper, more deliberate, almost taunting us, measuring our discipline, and testing whether our minds would falter under the persistent mimicry. The wind picked up, tugging at the net and the boat with subtle yet deliberate rhythm, each motion magnifying the tension. Shadows stretched across the deck, twisting unnaturally, and I could feel the presence of the trench's intelligence pressing against my focus. I forced myself to ignore the echoes, to maintain my attention on the ropes and deck, on the tangible and immediate, rather than the seductive voices that promised familiarity and comfort. Every second was a test, every twitch of the net a reminder that Rule 8, never respond to the echoes that sound like your own voice, was more than a guideline. It was a lifeline. Night fell fully, and the abyss below seemed to grow thicker, darker, more patient. The whispers of our own voices became hypnotic, insistent, almost coaxing me to speak, to call back, to break the rule that had kept others alive. My partner sat frozen, pale and trembling, finally silent after hours of internal struggle. The creature pulsed beneath the net with deliberate patience, and I could feel the intelligence measuring the smallest micro-expressions on our faces. I repeated Rule 8 in my mind one last time, embedding it deep as an anchor against the pull of the abyss. By the early hours of the morning, the echoes had quieted slightly, almost as if acknowledging our obedience, but the lesson remained stark. One word spoken to them could have catastrophic consequences. Shadows beneath the net twisted like smoke in the water, and the pulses beneath the deck reminded me that the Mariana Trench's patience was infinite. Even as relief mingled with exhaustion, I knew that the creature had been testing us, and Rule 8 had held. But the abyss was still patient, still watching, waiting for the next moment of weakness. As dawn broke, painting pale gray light across the deck, the whispers faded almost entirely, leaving only the faint pulses of the creature in the net. My partner and I exhaled in unison, drained, yet the tension lingered like a living thing. The rule had been obeyed, narrowly, and for now, it had preserved us. But the Mariana Trench stretched endlessly below, patient, intelligent, and relentless, and I knew the next trial was coming. Rule 8 had been survived, but the abyss had not yet released its grip. The sun had just begun to fade over the Mariana Trench, casting long, distorted shadows across the deck, and every movement felt heavier than the last. The net beneath the water pulsed in slow, deliberate undulations, as if aware of our every hesitation and adjustment. I reminded myself silently, Rule 9, never try to pull the net up faster than the current allows, and the words tightened in my chest like a warning knot. My partner eyed the ropes nervously, exhaustion and curiosity warring in his expression, and I could feel the pressure of responsibility pressing down on me. One false move, I murmured, almost to myself, and we lose more than just our grip. The current beneath the net tugged with patient force, resisting every subtle motion, and the creature's presence pulsed in time with the rhythm of the water. Every rope in my hands felt alive, vibrating faintly under the tension, a silent reminder that the abyss below was watching. I adjusted my stance, letting the line move at its own pace, careful not to fight the flow. The temptation to rush, to hurry, to lift the net quickly and end our ordeal gnawed at me, but the rule demanded patience above all. My partner's fingers twitched near the rope, and I grabbed his wrist firmly. "We wait," I whispered, "or the trench will make us pay." Hours passed as the deck swayed with the subtle rhythm of the current. The net shifted slowly beneath the water, each pulse deliberate, each motion a silent test of our discipline. The whispers from the creature grew more insistent, echoing my own doubts in ways that were impossible to ignore. The thought of defying the current crossed my mind once, just a fleeting, dangerous impulse, but I clenched my hands around the ropes and repeated Rule 9 in my mind, letting it anchor me. Every twitch beneath the surface reminded me of the consequences of impatience, of the danger of haste. The wind picked up, tossing the deck gently yet with intent, making the net sway more violently, and the creature beneath responded almost as if mocking our struggle. My partner whispered again, "Can't we just pull it faster?" And I shook my head, tension cutting through my voice. "We cannot. The current dictates the rhythm. If we try to rush it, the trench will claim what it wants." The net pulsed in acknowledgement, subtle yet deliberate, and I could feel the patient, intelligent force of the Mariana Trench measuring our obedience. The lesson was clear. Rushing was not survival, it was surrender. As night fell, the water beneath the net became almost black, opaque and infinite. Shadows moved beneath the surface in impossible ways, twisting and stretching like living smoke. The creature's voice, echoing fragments of our own speech and thought, grew more persuasive, tempting us to force the line, to pull faster, to defy the rules. I ignored the whispers, keeping my focus on the ropes and the slow, inevitable motion dictated by the current. Rule 9 had to be obeyed without exception, for a single miscalculation could turn the net into a trap and us into its prey. Hours dragged onward, fatigue pressing on my muscles and mind, and every subtle shift of the net under the water demanded complete attention. I adjusted my grip repeatedly, carefully timing every movement to match the resistance of the current, and my partner mirrored my caution with trembling hands. The pulses beneath the net were almost communicative now, each one testing our patience, each vibration a reminder that the trench's intelligence was vast, older than anything I had known. Even the faintest tug against the rhythm could provoke it, and I could not risk such an error. By midnight, the whispers grew almost articulate, forming entire phrases, mocking our restraint, tempting us to force the net upward against the current. The shadows beneath the water twisted unnaturally, forming impossible shapes, curling like smoke, pressing on our perception of reality. I crouched low, forcing my partner to do the same, repeating Rule 9. Never try to pull the net up faster than the current allows in my mind like a lifeline. The Mariana Trench had a patience older than centuries, and the creature inside the net tested it with precision and intelligence. Our compliance was the only thing keeping the abyss at bay. The hours passed slowly, every pulse beneath the surface echoing in my chest like a warning drum. I could feel the creature measuring our obedience, calculating the exact moment when impatience might take hold. My partner's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, yet he stayed silent, finally grasping the weight of the rule. The water rippled in response to subtle movements, responding to our discipline, and the whispers faded slightly, a dangerous calm settling over the trench. The lesson was clear. Haste was death, patience was survival. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the deck seemed smaller, heavier, as if the trench itself were pressing against us. The net's pulses beneath the water slowed, deliberate and measured, almost as if acknowledging our obedience. My hands ached, my muscles screamed in exhaustion, but the lesson of the night was embedded in every fiber of my being. Rule 9 was not merely a caution, it was the only shield against the intelligence that waited patiently below. The Mariana Trench stretched endlessly, patient and aware, but for now, we had survived by waiting, by respecting the rhythm, by yielding to the force we could not control. The gray light of early morning barely penetrated the thick fog over the Mariana Trench, and the deck felt impossibly heavy beneath our boots. The net beneath the water pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm, and I could sense the creature measuring our every movement, testing our obedience. I remembered Rule 10. Never allow the creature to mimic your voice for more than a few seconds. The words hammering in my mind with urgent clarity. My partner shivered beside me, glancing nervously at the black water below, and I whispered, "If it repeats us too long, it knows who we are." His eyes widened as he understood the gravity, and we both stiffened, hands gripping the ropes tightly. The whispers began again, faint at first, then more distinct, echoing the words I had muttered hours earlier. The creature's mimicry was unsettlingly perfect, down to the slight tremble in my own voice. My heart raced as I forced myself to remain silent, refusing to let it imitate me for more than the briefest moment. The net pulsed beneath the water, almost impatiently, testing whether we would break the rule. Every second it held my voice was a trap, a chance for it to reach deeper into our minds. My partner glanced at me, terrified, and I shook my head firmly, repeating the rules silently to keep both of us grounded. Hours dragged by as the creature's pulses and whispers tested our restraint. It mimicked phrases I had thought in my mind, but never spoken aloud, each repetition a carefully calculated attempt to make us respond. I clenched the ropes tightly, refusing to look at the water or engage in any way. Rule 10 was our only defense, and I could feel its importance in every fiber of my body. My partner's hands trembled, his breath shallow, but he remained silent, understanding finally that our survival depended entirely on discipline. The net shifted slowly beneath the surface, and shadows twisted unnaturally in the water, forming shapes that seemed almost human, almost familiar. The creature's mimicry grew bolder, repeating both my partner's and my own words, stretching them out in eerie, elongated tones. I forced myself to breathe slowly, maintaining focus on the ropes, on the deck, on the tangible world around me. Every pulse beneath the water was a reminder that Rule 10, never allow the creature to mimic your voice for more than a few seconds, was not merely guidance, it was life or death. The wind tugged at the ropes, making the net sway subtly, and the whispers became almost hypnotic, urging us to respond. The shadows beneath the water moved in deliberate, impossible patterns, curling and stretching like smoke in water. My partner's gaze flickered toward the water, temptation in his eyes, and I grabbed his arm, holding him firmly. "Do not," I whispered, "or it will own more than your voice." The creature's pulses seemed to acknowledge our obedience, almost as if it were testing our patience, measuring the exact moment when we might falter. Hours passed in oppressive silence, broken only by the faint swish of water and the subtle pulses from beneath the net. The mimicry continued, perfectly copying the timbre, pitch, and cadence of my voice, attempting to lure me into speaking. I refused, repeating Rule 10 silently as a lifeline, forcing my mind to stay tethered to discipline and survival. My partner, pale and trembling, mirrored my restraint, and together we maintained our vigil, aware that even a fraction of a second of indulgence could have catastrophic consequences. Night fell fully, shadows stretching across the deck in strange, distorted patterns. The creature's mimicry had become almost unbearably convincing, echoing fears, memories, and entire sentences we had never spoken aloud. I crouched low, hands gripping the ropes, every muscle taut with tension, repeating Rule 10 in my mind. The Mariana Trench below us seemed almost alive, patient and intelligent, observing every subtle twitch of our hands, every micro-expression of fear, measuring how far it could push us before we faltered. Hours merged into each other as we stayed vigilant, refusing to allow the mimicry to last more than a few seconds. The water pulsed and rippled with intention, almost breathing with us, and the net's subtle movements reflected the creature's awareness. I realized that even the faintest lapse, an accidental hum, a whispered sigh, a slip of thought spoken aloud, could allow it to anchor itself in our minds. The pressure was immense, suffocating, but Rule 10 remained our lifeline, a fragile barrier against the abyssal intelligence below. By the early hours of the morning, the creature's mimicry began to fade slightly, almost acknowledging our obedience. But the lesson was etched into our consciousness. 1 second of indulgence could have destroyed us. Shadows beneath the net moved in impossible ways, stretching, twisting, watching, calculating. My partner and I exhaled slowly, exhaustion mingled with relief, but the Mariana Trench remained patient, aware, and relentless. Rule 10: never allow the creature to mimic your voice. For more than a few seconds had been obeyed, narrowly, and for now, it had preserved our sanity. But the abyss remained, patient and ready for the next mistake. As dawn broke, casting pale gray light across the deck, the net pulsed faintly, and the shadows in the water seemed almost to acknowledge our obedience. My partner finally whispered, "We survived." I nodded, knowing we had for now, but the trench below was infinite, patient and intelligent. The creature would wait, and it would test us again. Rule 10 had held, but the Mariana Trench still loomed, dark, watchful, and endless, promising more trials before the day was done. The morning light barely broke through the dense fog over the Mariana Trench, casting ghostly gray streaks across the deck, and the air was heavy with tension. The net beneath the water pulsed slowly, deliberately, as if it were aware of our every thought, every hesitation. I remembered Rule 11, never take anything from the net without saying its name aloud first, and a chill ran down my spine. My partner glanced nervously at the black depths below, hands twitching, as though tempted to reach into the net without caution. "We have to be careful," I murmured, voice tight, "or we risk more than we can imagine." Hours passed as we prepared the net for the next pull. Shadows beneath the water moved with patient intelligence, curling and twisting like living smoke. The creature's pulses beneath the net seemed deliberate, almost communicative, each one pressing against our nerves. I reminded myself of Rule 11, repeating it silently as a mantra to keep my fear and curiosity in check. The net contained objects and shapes that defied explanation, shimmering faintly in the murky water, each one carrying a presence older and stranger than the Mariana Trench itself. The first object rose slowly, a dark, twisted mass that pulsed faintly as if alive. My partner hesitated, fingers hovering above the rope. "Do I just grab it?" he asked nervously, eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, the words of Rule 11 firm in my mind. "Say its name first. If it refuses to respond, or if you hesitate, you leave it." His voice trembled as he repeated the rule aloud, calling the object by a name he could barely pronounce. The net pulsed in response, almost acknowledging compliance, and we carefully lifted the object, hands steady, not daring to rush. Hours stretched on as we retrieved more objects from the net, each one stranger, darker, and more alive than the last. Shadows beneath the water moved with impossible grace, almost mocking our diligence. The whispers returned, distorted echoes of our own voices, urging us to skip the rule, to snatch the objects without naming them. I clenched the ropes tightly, forcing my partner to follow my example, repeating Rule 11 silently, letting it anchor both of us. The Mariana Trench waited, patient, calculating, testing our resolve with every pulse beneath the water. By midday, exhaustion pressed on our bodies and minds, but we remained vigilant. The net pulsed continuously, and each object seemed to test our discipline in new ways. Some whispered, some pulsed with light, some seemed to breathe, each demanding that we observe Rule 11. My partner nearly forgot once, his fingers twitching over an object without speaking, and I grabbed his wrist just in time. "Remember the rule," I said, voice tight, "or it will claim more than your hands." The creature beneath the net seemed to pulse in response, deliberate and patient, as though counting our lapses. The wind tugged at the boat, creating gentle but deliberate waves that made the net sway. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting in impossible ways, reflecting our fear and exhaustion back at us. The objects within the net seemed to sense our hesitation, pulsating faintly, as if to test us. I crouched low, repeating Rule 11, never take anything from the net without saying its name aloud, first silently to myself, grounding both my mind and my partner's. Each pulse beneath the water was a warning, every shadow a subtle threat, reminding us of the trench's ancient intelligence. By evening, the creature's pulses beneath the net had become almost hypnotic, attempting to lure us into error, into rushing, into snatching objects without caution. The whispers echoed in perfect imitation of our voices, growing bolder and more insistent. My partner's hands trembled as he prepared to lift another object, and I whispered firmly, "Say its name, Rule 11. He repeated the rule aloud, calling the object by its faintly glowing, almost alien name, and the net seemed to acknowledge our obedience, pulsing gently but deliberately. Night fell fully, shadows stretching and twisting across the deck like living fingers. The net pulsed in deliberate, intelligent rhythms, and the Mariana Trench beneath remained black and infinite, patient beyond comprehension. The objects now pulsed with an almost sentient awareness, testing our patience and obedience. Every time my partner lifted one, I forced him to speak its name, never allowing hesitation. I repeated Rule 11 silently, letting it anchor me against the seduction of curiosity and fear. The trench was patient, infinitely patient, and one lapse could undo everything we had survived so far. By the early hours of the morning, we had successfully retrieved several objects, each named aloud before touching, each obeying the rules that had kept us alive until now. The whispers had quieted slightly, though the shadows beneath the net twisted like smoke, reminding us of the constant vigilance required. My partner and I exhaled slowly, exhaustion heavy on our bodies, yet the tension remained, a subtle reminder that the trench was far from done. Rule 11. Never take anything from the net without saying its name aloud. First had been obeyed, and for now, it had preserved both our sanity and our lives. As dawn broke, casting pale light across the deck, the Mariana Trench stretched endlessly below, dark, patient, and watchful. The net pulsed faintly, the objects within shimmering subtly, and the whispers were nearly silent. My partner turned to me, voice trembling. "We made it through." I nodded slowly, aware that our survival had depended on every single rule, but the abyss below remained infinite, intelligent, and patient. Rule 11 had been the final barrier, the last lesson, but the Mariana Trench continued to wait, as it always had, for the next moment of weakness, the next human who thought they could defy its rules.